Hello and welcome back to Beyond the Veil Background Information. We're going to do a creature profile today, and we're still in the realm of the serpents amongst the night predators, so we're going to be doing about the Medusae and Gorgons. They are slightly separated, but also very much the same. So it's going to work like usual with me giving a quote for one of them from a story they mentioned in, then talking about the sources behind this creature, like why I chose this creature from the Veil, what mythology there is to it, and then I will give you a creature profile, which will be how I interpret these beings into my Beyond the Veil universe. Now, with the Gorgons and Medusae, they do actually turn up every now and again, and for the one I've quoted for, there's actually a Gorgon and a Medusa in it. I have girlfriends among many of the serpent types, including a Medusa and a Gorgon. I found them no different to any other women. They are all beautiful and all passionate, though I had to be careful. If I accidentally bite my Medusa's neck and spill blood, we might be raising a Pegasus son. A quote from the Black and Viper. When you hear the name Medusa, you automatically think of the snake-haired woman that could turn into stone with one look, and is known as the Gorgon. So, what's the difference between her and a Gorgon? Well, in Greek mythology, Medusa is either turned into a Gorgon or an actual Gorgon, but unlike her two sisters, not immortal. Plasterings of each figure have distorted their interpretation in pop culture. Gorgons we see as grotesque, tusked, bearded, vaguely female monsters, almost a description of myself there, whereas Medusa is often described as beautiful but for the mane of snakes and those shocking eyes. This comes from the variations of the Medusa mythology we'll discuss in a moment, but for my own reasons to separate these are because of the art of Medusa separating her from the other Gorgon art, that being Caravaggio's image of her severed head, which I love. So let's get into the mythology of Gorgons to begin with. Where Medusa fits in here, we'll include her, but the separated mythology of her that is more common now we'll discuss after. To begin with, there are traditionally only 3 Gorgons, who I probably cannot pronounce because I'm not very good with Greek. Steno, meaning forceful, Uriel, meaning far roaming, or Urali. I'll be here all night if I keep trying to do that. And Medusa, meaning guardian or protectress, possibly. All 3 sisters, but of them only Medusa is mortal. Their description is often that of a head of hair made of venomous serpents and faces hideous enough to turn men to stone. There's an emphasis on their victims and targets being men, as with the majority of Greek mythological female monsters, they tend to have a secondary function of being abnormal to the women that stay at home and don't do anything back. Something that's particularly pulled from the Gorgons and Medusa in particular into the sphere of feminism, but we'll discuss that later. Now, the Gorgons appear in the story of Perseus as a wedding gift for his mother who was marrying and asked of a king. Said king, Polydectes, intends his stepson to be slain, or at least to be out of the way so he can be with Danae, but of course Perseus achieves his goal and turns him into stone and saves his mother, and then uses the head of Medusa to kill the dragon of Joppa that's about to eat Princess Andromeda and then marries her. You probably best know the story from the film version of Clash of the Titans, but they omit the two sister Gorgons, Polydectes and Danae, and of course the fact that those scorpion monsters do develop from the droplets of Medusa's blood. Pegasus is actually born out of her body when her neck is severed and is assumed as being her son via Poseidon, along with his human brother, Creosaur, who turns up in full armour apparently, but we'll get into that later. Overall, the Gorgons only appear very briefly in the tale, but they are important for being the targets of the hero's attack. Now, going back to just Gorgons on the whole, the name is said to mean grim or dreadful, and there is debate that the images showing the bloated face and hanging tongue through the tusk-like teeth with snake hair is actually a way to interpret a dead face after bloating in water. Certainly, if you had looked into a marsh and seen someone's head that had been there for a while, you might think it was a monster staring back at you, and it could stop you dead in your tracks. But the image has been plastered about objects as a protection image. Belief stated that blood taken from a Gorgon's right side could bring back the dead, and blood taken from the left was instantly poisonous. The descriptions of them really do vary more than you think, but the predominant feature is their penetrating gaze that turns people into stone. The power of these divine eyes has meant in depictions the entire posture of the Gorgon with limbs out at angles is supposed to amplify this image of the eyes. Some are depicted with broad round heads, tusks, projecting teeth, short beards, bronze claws, wings, and sometimes even scaly skin. Most believe them the daughters of Keto, the sea monster, and Phorcys the primordial sea god. Euryale is one of the more interesting of the sisters, known for her bellowing cries as they eat wanderers onto their island, but also because some stories denote that after Medusa died, she became a lover of Poseidon as well, and possibly was the mother of the hunter Orion. Steno was thought to be the most independent of the sisters, claiming to have killed more men than her sisters, often depicted as thinner with red snakes instead of hair, or tusked with bronze hands and a snake belt. However, in the Roman mythology, she and Euryale were actually human sisters to Medusa in the temple, and for being sisters to Medusa were also turned into Gorgons alongside her. So now, we'll discuss Medusa. Either she was born to the sea monster and a sea god along with her sisters and was as ugly and vicious as them, but unlike her sisters was mortal, or not. For a while she was depicted in art this way, until suddenly she became a little more attractive, and then Ovid changed everything in his Metamorphosis story. In this story, Medusa was once a beautiful maiden working in the temple of Athena, and as such a sacred virgin. However, Poseidon took a liking to her, and despite her attempts to repel him, she was raped. At least most scholars agree this is the interpretation. So, due to victim blaming at the time, Athena was being very strict on virginity, and the fact it happened in her sacred temple, she punished Medusa by turning her beautiful hair into serpents and giving her a deadly gaze. She is later decapitated by Perseus, later on with Pegasus springing from the blood of her neck. Some say the Amphisbaena too, but lately Medusa's come under a lot of revival. You can notice my tone there with the phrase victim blaming. For us reading in modern times, we can see it as rape, but as it was the choice of a god and they are a divinity, it was more seen that Medusa would have had to succumb, but that for succumbing within the temple complex was the problem. Medusa has become part of modern pop culture in a curious way. If you think of depictions of angry women, it's always their hair raising or snaking out, the teeth on display, and the maddened eyes. The Gorgon image becoming the go-to description for angry women. There's also some thought that Medusa not only stands for the victim blaming, but that her subsequent fury at what she has lost and been reduced to because of the lust of men is why she turns about to become a monster to men. But that's something for people to go dipping into at their own whim, and your interpretation of Medusa from either older tales or Ovid's transformation is up to you. In the Vale, though, Gorgons and Medusa are seen as part of an all-female species that can produce like children with other snake species, but not so much with other species, often producing humans instead. The Medusa in particular is seen as the more attractive of the kind, having more pleasant features, but for the writhing hair, fangs, and the fact her penetrating stare can kill. But in the old days of feasting off flesh, she was a lure that did not turn men to stone, but kept her victims in place like something seemingly hypnotized by a snake, whilst her Gorgon sisters ripped them apart. The Medusa is mortal too and can be killed by vampires, but they have an odd sort of trick to them, in that any puncture to the neck that spills blood but does not kill them, and the skin here is thickened, the blood will turn into a Pegasus or vampiric Pegasus, which can either be trained as an animal or raised as a child and develop the ability to have a human form through this. It's actually one of the reasons vampires don't like Gorgons, and Gorgons tend to stand apart as more of a link between demons and the Vale. But in modern days they thrive in the Vale, and special contact lenses allow them to walk in their forms, or in their fully human shape, as calmly as they want without fear. They've also found that dating this way helps, although there are no instances of marriage, as most suitors are often frightened away upon understanding that Gorgon sisters tend to stick together for life, even if they feud often. So here's the species profile. Side, neutral. Created by descendants of Echidna and Typhon, as well as some other demons. Created to terrify beings away from sacred demon areas where they were vulnerable. created when? Before the creation of the veil, but some believe they thrived only after the Nephilim roamed the earth. Physical description. Winged, broad shoulders, and rather burly-looking women with beards and sometimes tusks, claws, and penetrating eyes with writhing venomous snakes instead of hair. The Medusa form, though, has fangs instead of tusks, no beard or wings, and tends to have a much more feminine appearance, though most of the Gorgons could easily be described as buxom nonetheless. Abilities: digest human meat, produce poison from their snake heads, incredibly strong, can fly, and have penetrating glares that can make someone freeze in their tracks. They can breed other Gorgons with other members of the serpent group, and Medusa, though more mortal, have thickened scales around the back of the neck, so attempts to cut off the head require heavier blows, and from one injury and spilling of blood, a Pegasus will appear and often attack for its mother's sake. Most known for eyes that make people freeze. Weaknesses: Medusae are mortal, and 2 strikes to the neck or one very heavy one can kill her. Gorgons are generally immortal, but can also starve, and both can risk death from birth, though reproducing can be complicated as there are no males in their species, and they require mates from other kinds. Number of the Gorgon: there are said to be about 6,000 at most, and of the Medusa, as much higher amount of 20,000 is thought, but the Medusae do better in human regions. Well-known beings: Medusa from mythology, but there are a few more known for being pictured on household products along with the Gorgons. Characters in stories: I have Nadia the Gorgon and Elka the Medusa, loves of Theodoric Viper in the Black and Viper story. Thank you for listening.